Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Thomas H. Johnson volume, and we turn now to poem 712, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Now, many have argued this is Emily's most famous poem. Certainly scholars have spent a lot of time talking about the importance of this poem. To just be clear, several of you will argue that we've been preparing for all of our previous reading to study and read this poem. I'll not go back and read all of them, but you will remember poems like 115, 279 and 280, 445, especially 445, 449, 564, 465, 665, and so many other poems. I will just pause and remind us when we met 465, because I told you guys we would come back to it, so here we go. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes around it wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset when the king be witnessed in the road. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me be assignable, and then it was there interposed a fly, with blue uncertain stumbling buzz between the light and me, and then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. And of course this whole idea of what you see when you die will be central to this poem as well. Now, when this one was published in 1890, it was actually titled Chariot, which is interesting because it seems maybe to be tying into that famous biblical story of 2 Kings 2:11. You'll remember when Elijah is taken up into heaven in a chariot, and of course the horses are horses of fire. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist, and I'm hopeful you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as, of course, the preceding 711 poems. We just finished with 711 Strong Draughts. And as we say, if you have been with us for this study, then in many ways you know that there's different ways that so many of these poems about death and dying are going to be read. For example, there's a number of scholars who have suggested that this isn't a poem about Emily's dying, but rather a poem of Emily's choosing, namely choosing her poetic life. In other words, choosing to be a poet was for Emily a certain kind of death or dying, or a resignation, if you will. I'm going to leave it to you guys to decide, but what is sometimes referred to as the flood subject, that question of recognizing the poetic choice of being a poet or poethood. Also, we're going to meet a chariot here, or a carriage. And some have pointed out, you'll remember the famous idea that Apollo carries the poet to heaven in a chariot. So we'll enjoy that. The scholar Sharon Leiter has said it this way, and I think it's always fascinating to go and study what some of the scholars have to say. She says it this way: scholars have suggested that Emily's carriage ride with death was inspired by a biographical incident, the 1847 death of Olivia Colman, the beautiful older sister of Emily's close friend Eliza M. Colman, who died of a tubercular hemorrhage while out riding in a carriage. But there are also abundant cultural sources for the image. The poem's guiding metaphor of a young woman abducted by death goes back, of course, to this classical myth of Persephone, right, the daughter of Circe or Demeter, who's carried off to the underworld by Hades. In medieval times, death in the maiden was a popular iconographic theme, sometimes taking the form of a virgin sexually ravished by death. So we've got all kinds of potential background stuff going on here. One scholar has called this the specter of genteel carnality. I am going to challenge you to think about the tone of this poem as Emily talks about this ride that she takes. Can we say this journey that she takes? Because I think there's a whole lot of Homer and Virgil and Dante standing behind this poem. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle, We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Now, of course, these horses' heads can take us back, as we said, to that 2 Kings 2:11 passage, and Emily would have known that passage well in her King James study of the King James Bible. It is interesting she begins with the word because it's almost like we're in the middle of a thought here when she says it. Because I couldn't stop for death. Now, again, death mentioned in 135 of Emily's poems. When we hit poem 976, this will be a fascinating time for us to come back to this. I'll just read this one. Death is a dialogue between the spirit and the dust. Dissolve, says death. The spirit, sir, I have another trust. Death doubts it, argues from the ground. The spirit turns away, just laying off for evidence an overcoat of clay. This idea of a dialogue, I think, is central to our reading here. And when I was asked, what are you going to call your series? Well, I had finished, of course, with Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass in our study of Leaves of Grass, the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass 1892 edition, and we call that Talks with Walt. We decided to just go ahead and call this Chats with Emily. But one of the reasons is because a poem like this has a tone that's almost like conversational. Hey, let me tell you what it was like when I died, or when I made the decision to die to other forms of possible lives, if you read it that way. Because I couldn't stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. Notice we've got kind and civility. In other words, oh, what a nice action. Death was nice to me. In other words, nothing to be feared. It was the king she was waiting for, you'll remember, in 465. The carriage, back to poem 603, held but just ourselves, and I think just is a key word here, and immortality. Now, this is central. Notice we've actually got 3 players in this poem, and we're going to end with eternity. And many have read this poem as Emily's movement from the idea of a belief in immortality to simply a recognition that maybe all death is, the best we can say about it is, there's eternity. And obviously, Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn doth tease us out of thought, cold pastoral as doth eternity, comes to mind. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. Emily mentions immortality in 41 of her poems, by the way. Now notice we go from I to we. We slowly drove. Notice again, this movement goes not rapid. He knew no haste. That's driving the carriage, if you will. And I had put away my labor and my leisure too. This use of the word leisure takes us back to poem 618, you'll recall. For his civility. In other words, I didn't fight him. When the decision came for death to arrive, I didn't fight him. We, now notice the stages of life here as we'll play the game. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the rain. And of course, think about all the different references to child and children that will be played in her poetry. And as well, the notion of playing. 74 of her poems she'll mention that game as well. And as we've commented on, the idea of child and children in 71 different poems. She loves that idea. So that's the first thing they passed. Then they passed the fields of gazing grain. Think about the power of the idea of a grain being the reference of life. And of course, we mentioned already Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Why the gain is grazing is always been a question for readers of this poem. The gazing grain, it's almost like even grass is preparing for its own death. And then finally, the third stage, we pass the setting sun, moving, of course, into the darkness. But then it's like she pauses, and again, chats with Emily. Or she says, rather, dash, he, notice capitalized, passed us. That is to say, the setting sun. The dews, now notice the sounds here brilliantly. The dews drew quivering and chill. You'll remember quivering from 125. And chill, I think chill may be the key word of the poem. For only gossamer, my gown, my tippet, her long scarf, only tulle. In other words, she's dressed in such a way that she's starting to get cold. Of course, many have read this as she is laid into the earth. We pause. Now notice, we go from movement to now cessation of movement. Before a house, notice capitalized, that seemed a swelling of the ground. And many have commented on the power of the word swelling as being the central word. By the way, notice ground repeated twice here. The roof was scarcely visible. Notice we go from seeming to scarcely. The cornice in the ground. Again, back to this, what can you see? And notice, much like we were reading of 465, there is this reducing of sight. I can't see, I can't understand as much. And then finally, the roof and the cornice, it's like going down. Of course, I can't see enough, I can't see enough. Since then, now, and then all of a sudden we got point of reference. Oh, so it's been long ago that she's describing this event. Now again, some have read this not as Emily's meeting of death and this whole notion of this is what it's like to die, kind of like what happens at 465, but rather something more profound is happening here. And certainly a couple of scholars have argued, no, this poem is really about Emily's choosing, making a decision to choose something. Since then, 'tis centuries, a long time ago, and yet feels shorter than the day. In other words, it feels like just the other day. I first surmised, you'll remember surmise from when we did poem 617, the horses' heads were toward eternity again, to move from immortality to eternity. Well, I think the argument that she's making here, and again, this a lot depends on how you read this poem. I think the argument she's making, though, is that the moment of recognition of the importance of an event is central to that event. And the idea of accepting death, however you understand that, that is to say, to transcend and include. In other words, there comes a moment when we move out of whatever it is that we have been stuck in and we move on, or we take that final ride, however you wish to think of it. At 2b, many have seen the tone of this poem as ironic. I'd like to challenge you to think about, go back and study this poem. There are some that say, what Emily's suggesting is that, I remember now that ride, and it culminated in something quite different from what I thought it would be. Notice, we start out being very kind and civil, but by the end, well, there's a certain kind of swelling in the ground, and there's a certain kind of seeming, and it isn't clear what one can see, and it's, to that degree, maybe a little bit unusual. We move from immortality and the belief of the afterlife to, I don't know if it was just eternity, that in fact, in the end, was what it was all about. Think about as well, the majestic language of this poem, right? I mean, it is pretty amazing. There are all kinds of examples of alliteration here. Could, kindly, carriage in stanza 1, knew, know, and labor, leisure in stanza 2. Slowly, civility, school, strove, setting, sun in stanzas 2 and 3. Recess, rain, gazing, grain in stanza 3. Dews, drew, gossamer gown, tippet, tool in stanza 4. Seemed, swelling, scarcely, centuries, surmised in stanzas 5 and 6. Horses' heads in stanza 6. Also, pay attention to how paused in stanza 5 picks up phonically the repeated past in earlier stanzas. We have assonance as well, don't we? Not, stop, stopped in stanza 1. Slowly, drove, no in stanza 2. Gazing, grain in stanza 3. Past, rather in stanzas 3 and 4. Dews, drew in stanza 4. And we have some consonants as well, don't we? Because, could, carriage, could, death, kindly, stopped, held, but, just, immortality in stanza 1. Scarcely, cornice, sense in stanzas 5 and 6. Added, and it adds, obviously, to the alliterative S sounds, those hard sibilants that will work together. 'Tis, centuries, fields, surmise, horse's head of stanza 6. It's amazing, the symphonic nature of this poem. Well, what are we going to compare this to at 3a? Well, obviously, all the other death poems. I mean, we started, by paying attention to just a few of them that we have gone back to. I think the whole notion of the Odyssey of Homer, especially that idea of the journey is central, is key to reading this. Obviously, we have the journeys of Virgil's Aeneid as well as Dante's classic journey. We've given full lectures on all those poems at learnstrong.net. I mentioned Song of Myself and passage 6. Think about it. That passage is amazing. Those two are contemporaries, right? That passage begins with a child coming to the speaker, and asking, what is the grass? In this poem, notice, children are also mentioned. Only here, notice, the almost like naive position that the childlike naivete is taken in the beginning. I was nice enough to put away my work and my leisure too, and I went along for the ride, if you will. And and yet by the end of the poem, there's a growing up that seems to happen as well, a coming to terms, if you will. Finally, a 3B. Well, many have read this poem as, this is Emily's penultimate poem about getting ready to die. Others have read this poem and said, I'm not so sure about that. I think this is a poem, rather, about Emily's moment when she chose to decide, I'm going to put away my leisure and my labor, and I'm going to go to work as a poet, and that will be my work for the rest of my life. I challenge you to think about, how do you read this poem? I hope that Emily is challenging you. Thank you.